Hello and welcome to the Indy Author Podcast. Today, my guest is John DeDakis. Hey, John, how are you doing?
Hi, Matty.
To give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you, John DeDakis is an award-winning author of 5 mystery suspense thriller novels, a writing coach and instructor, a manuscript editor, a former editor on CNN's The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer, and a former White House correspondent. In his spare time, he's an amateur jazz drummer, and he's also the host of the video podcast One to One, which is very fun. I had the honor of being a guest on John's podcast, and his latest book is Fake. And in fact, in another connection, I got to talk about Fake with John on my video series, What I Learned, and I'll include a link to that conversation in the show notes. And so John and I are going to be talking today about organization for writers. I nerd out on this topic a lot. And I thought it would be fun to start out, John, asking you, what from your experience on The Situation Room did you carry forward to your organizational approach to being an author?
Whoa, I don't know if I did. I mean, the CNN is huge, and so they're just normally organized to begin with. And so it was always easy to find what I needed to find to do my job as an editor. I mean, getting to the wires, being able to find video, but it's all about filing. It's all about file systems, I guess you could say. And so even though I don't think I took anything consciously from my CNN experience, that is what actually is the similarity, and that's having folders and files where you can find them.
So, did you bring anything forward in the sense of it being like a downsized version of the enormous version that CNN had at its disposal?
I think you could probably say that. As I say, though, unconsciously, I think any organization that's successful is well organized. And I think that that is what I tried to transfer over to my own career as a novelist, writing coach, and manuscript editor. Is if you've got so many balls in the air, you really need to be able to compartmentalize, which is what a file and a folder, what those things are. You need to be able to compartmentalize so that you can jump from one thing to the next. And as soon as you get there, you're oriented.
And is your organizational approach mainly around content as opposed to like your calendar or other organizational things?
Got it. Yeah, my calendar is on my phone, and I don't do it on my computer or anything like that. And the phone is, I mean, the phone is my brain, basically, my external drive. And so, yeah, the writing stuff and all of that, the content, the creative stuff, that's all on the computer, compartmentalized in folders for whatever project I'm working on.
So let's start with organizing information for fiction, because I'm going to have to go back and look. I just had this conversation with someone on the podcast, but I'm always interested in getting different perspectives. Oh, I think it was Art Taylor. And when I think of information related to fiction, I think that there are kind of 3 categories of information. One is, it would be cool to write a book about storm chasing. We were just talking about that a little bit before we hit record. Then there's here's a really cool way to describe clouds. Here's a verb, an adjective I want to use someday. And then well, I said there were 3, but they're kind of an infinite number. Then there are all the ideas that pop into your head that one might want to capture between those 2 extremes. Do you have approaches for segmenting that out so it's manageable?
The things that you were mentioning are not things that I do. When I was at the very beginning of starting to write fiction, I had a notebook. It was a spiral notebook, and I called it a writing notebook. It's now my journal, and it was in longhand. And whenever I had an idea, I would write it in all caps, idea, and then I'd write whatever it was. And I've gone back and I've looked at some of my old writing notebooks, and I look at some of the ideas and I go, I have no idea what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And so I really don't have idea files, but that's okay because I think it really depends on the writer and what it is they need. For me, ideas, if they're really worth anything, won't let me go. They just embed in my subconscious or in my thoughts and ruminations, and that's where I work with them. If I write them down and put them aside, they're usually gone, and I'll never be able to do anything with them. Plus, I'm not a writer. I don't write a lot. I write long form novels, And lately, they've been every 4 years. It's not like I just crank them out, because the novels that I'm working on, I'm wrestling through something. And so the big idea has been with me. The other things that pop up happen during the writing process. So in that case, I'm not really trying to organize anything in terms of ideas and things like that. So I guess the answer to your question is that the things that you use, the things that you want to capture and save, are different from the things I want to capture and save. But what works for you is great. What works for me is fine. And I think that's sort of the takeaway, is that whatever organizational system you use, it needs to serve you, and it need not be something artificial like, oh, I must do this or I have to do this.
Yeah, I think.
And I'm certainly interested in your perspective, because this is your career, the you organization.
Well, I'd like to tap into your career because I just think that any platform called the Situation Room, by definition, is going to require organization, and I want to make sure that we get that. So, what is the thing that identifies a piece of information or a piece of whatever you want to organize that signals it as something that you want to make sure that you're handling in an organized way?
Well, one of the things that comes to mind is research. So whenever I've got a project that's going on, I have a research folder. And as the story is coming into view and as I'm working through it, I come across issues that I don't know a lot about. And so within the research folder, I'll create other folders for the topics that I want to know more about. I've got a political thriller coming out next summer. And so abortion is a major storyline. So I have a folder on abortion. And in that folder, I've got links to all kinds of different news stories and other resources that I was able to access and I can go back to. And that's true for any number of other topics in the book. White Christian nationalism. What else? I can't, mental illness. A lot of the QAnon. These are issues that are going to be playing out in my next novel. And so I have research folders, topic folders for each one of those topics.
And where are you keeping those? Are they just documents that you have in your computer's file manager? Are you using an app for that?
It's not, it's Word, it's a Word document, and each project has its own folder. So I've written 6 novels. So each folder is book 1, book 2. And then within that folder is everything else. Sometimes it's just loose files, but more often than not, I'm creating folders within that project so that I'll be able to go to wherever I need. Probably the most important folder is the draft folder, because any novelist or writer will tell you that you're going to do more than one draft. And so each draft, it remains separate. And I also keep a journal of the project that migrates from one draft to the other, that gives me a sense of what's happening creatively in that particular project. Because in my novel Bullet in the Chamber, which is my fourth novel, I think I went away from it for 4 years or 3.5 years. And when I went back to it, I knew where I left off and what I needed to do, and I was able to pick up and go from there.
So can you describe what would be in your draft document and what would be in your journal document? Like you're getting up, you've had your coffee, you sit down at your desk, you open the draft document and the journal document. And can you describe like what would be the equivalent entries in each of those so we can better understand how you differentiate those?
Yes, the journal document, which is basically the project document, I call it journal of the book. It has 2 components to it, and it's the very first thing I open up when I'm going to be working on it for the day. So the very first thing I do is I do a word search for DeDakis. That's my last name. And as soon as I do that, it takes me to I do the word search, and it goes to the last journal entry. This is a document. By the time the project is finished, it could be 175 pages if you were to print it out. But if you keep it in your computer, you're not killing trees and it's easily accessible. So as soon as I do the Dodakis stopped here, and that gets me to the next journal entry. And I basically, because I'm a journalist, I dateline it. I do the date, the day of the week, where I am, and the time. I don't know why. I just it's history. Maybe the Smithsonian will care about this
Yeah,
someday. I don't know. And
planning
then
ahead.
right, exactly. And then I just do a little thumbnail of what's going on in my life. And it's not my journal, it's just the context of what's going on in either in the world, my life, or whatever, and what I hope to accomplish. Then let's say that I have a work in progress. So I go to the draft file, and in or the draft folder. Within that folder are a stack of files. Each one is a chapter. And I give the very first, the way you title it is one, and then give it a name so that you know what's in it. And two, Word knows how to count. So if you're doing it 1, 2, 3, 4, it's going to order it so each chapter is in its right order. And so then I do my work. And by the end of the session, I go back to the journal and do another time reference of this is what I did. And if there's a long session where I'm doing several chapters, or if I'm doing a rewrite or something, every time I finish a particular piece of the puzzle, I'll note that in the journal entry, another time hack, and then this is what I did. And then when I'm done for the day, you tie it up, file it back, and it's waiting for you the next time. The other thing that happens in the journal is that I create the scene outline, because this is helpful when an agent says, I'd like the synopsis, you're building the synopsis as you write the book. And it basically gives the chapter number, that whatever title I give it, just for the sake of being able to find things. Because novels often cover a certain amount of time, either a week or a month or however long, you have a timeline in there so that you know what is happening on what day in the story, and then just a little thumbnail of what happens in that chapter. So again, you can get a bird's eye view of your novel as it's coming together. And I also note the date that I started the draft, or the date I started it, this date that I worked on the second draft, so that you can see the evolution of the project. It's history, I guess you could say. And so those are really the two main things. The journal, which chronologizes the project, and then just the whatever it is that you're working on in the draft folder.
I use Scrivener, and I think that between Word and Scrivener, we probably cover a lot of what our listeners are using. And I'm interpreting what you're accomplishing to what I use Scrivener to do. So, for example, one of the things I truly love about Scrivener, and yes, I know there are other writing apps that do this, but I started out with Scrivener, is that you're capturing every component, however you want to define component, as a separate little thing in a nav in the left. And so if I have all the chapters and then I realize I want one chapter to be in a different place, I just have to drag it up to the place where I want it to be, rather than like having to copy and paste in one big longer document. And the way I've used that is, in general, each of my components is a scene or a chapter, but I have one called notes in like big caps. And I'll use that to mark where I am in the story, because the way I write is I write like an outline, then I write a more complete outline, then I write a more complete outline, then pretty soon it starts turning into a manuscript, and I just keep like uh, running through it until it's all polished up.
Is it
Yeah.
one big document, or is each chapter a separate file for you?
Well, in Scrivener, there's a project that's the entire book. And then there are scenes, they're called scenes in Scrivener, that are components within it. So it's almost like if you were in Word and you had the outline view on. It's like the outline view that you would see on the left in Word, but the components are more easily draggable and manipulatable than they would be in the outline view of Word.
Okay.
And then I have this notes entry, which is all the things that I need to keep in mind in general across the book. If there are certain things like double check the timing of the scene or something, I just put a note about that in that scene component itself. But if there are things like, be sure to keep reminding the reader that it's spring, or don't forget that the primary motivation of this character is whatever. And then I use that component as like the marker between what what I've already worked through during that pass and what I still need to work through. And the benefit there is that before I start in on editing the next scene, I can reread that notes component and remind myself of all those things that I need to be keeping an eye out for.
Did you discover that learning Scrivener, though, that the learning curve is almost vertical? I mean, you really
Yeah.
need to spend a lot of time in order to master it?
Yeah, I don't think Scrivener, the tool is very expensive, but I did have to spend hundreds of dollars in online classes.
Oh
Um,
my, really?
yes, and also I found someone named Gwen Hernandez, if anybody's looking for Scrivener help, that I had a couple of like one-on-one consulting sessions because it is hard, but at this point I've identified the parts of Scrivener that I use, and I now know to ignore the ones that I don't. So I'm obviously using just a tiny fraction of its possible utility. But I think that there are, if I were starting out today, I don't know that I would recommend Scrivener to people. I would recommend them to look at other things. But at
Yeah,
this point, I've customized it so much that I'm loath to move off it because now I know how to like tweak all the levers to make it do what I want to.
exactly, and that's why I haven't gotten Scrivener because of the amount of time you and apparently money you need to invest in order to master it. What I've discovered is by keeping my organizational system simple, it's not the tail wagging the dog, and I'm able to concentrate on my writing and not be preoccupied with maintaining my organizational system.
Yeah, if I were advising someone now, I would probably advise them to look at either Atticus or Dibbly Create, which are two newer and more streamlined um, word word processing. That sounds so old fashioned, but you know what I'm trying to writing apps.
What about Plotter, Plottr? Are you familiar with that?
Well, Plotter, as far as I know from my last look at it, and there's actually on my YouTube channel, there's a playlist called Tools Cruise, and Troy Lambert from Plotter came on and gave a little demo of Plotter. And Plotter is great, but I don't think even Plotter would recommend it as something that you do. You're writing it, you're plotting in it, and so its functionality is optimized to like tracking character profiles and multiple storylines and things like that. I apologize, Troy and Ryan, if I'm downplaying what Plotter can achieve, but I think it's aiming for something a little different. But something like Atticus, which is from Kindlepreneur, which Dave Chesson is the guy behind, is not only, I think, providing a nice streamlined version of what I'm achieving with Scrivener, but also the other big plus of something like Atticus is that you can do both your writing and your formatting in the same tool. So back in the day when I was buying my tools, I got Scrivener and I got Vellum, which I use for formatting and the plug
Because you self-publish.
because I self-publish.
That kind of formatting.
Yes, yes, exactly. So I can go into I can export a document from Scrivener into Word, and then I can import it from Word into Vellum. And then with a push of a button, I can make beautiful ebooks for all the retail platforms and print, which is great. And again, I wouldn't move off it because I've optimized both of those tools for myself. But Atticus does that all in one place. And so you
Oh,
don't have to be moving documents from one thing to the other. And the other thing,
how do you spell Atticus?
Atticus.
Okay.
And then the other one that I've explored a little bit, but not in a great amount of detail, is Dibbly Create. And I think Dibbly Create's plug is that, among other things, it is more explicitly tapped into AI so people can use it more easily if they want to use AI to help brainstorm, or it's also tapped into a marketplace. So if you're done with your work in Dibbly Create and then you're looking for an editor, then you can easily actually from the app explore a marketplace of editors and book cover designers and so on. So yeah, those are the things that I would recommend to people if they were starting out now. And I imagine that both Dibbly Create and Atticus, as well as Plotter, would have this ability to more easily drag components around to
But
reorder
the
chapters, for
thing that's
example.
the most interesting to me is the formatting.
Yeah. Yeah, I tried. There are ways theoretically in Scrivener to create the EPUBs and the PDFs you need, but I don't think anybody uses them. I haven't tried using them for years, but they were horrible when I tried using them.
And when you say Dibbly Creates, is that Dibley?
Dibbly.
Dibbly. Okay, thanks.
And all
Creates.
these things are evolving so quickly that here we are in December 2023 recording this, and I maybe haven't looked at these things for months. So if I'm saying something outdated, I apologize. But That's the kind of the suite of tools that I would look into.
Okay.
But I don't want to get too far afield from your organizational approach. And I really liked what you were saying about maintaining a synopsis at the same time, because going back and writing a synopsis is just a big pain.
Yeah, it is. It's very hard because it's like you've been all of the moving parts of this book, but how do you synthesize it and make it uh, valuable for an agent to know that you know how to tell a story?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, writing a synopsis can be really tricky.
Yeah. This kind of thing is exactly what I'm hoping AI will provide, because I actually just had the experience of finishing a novella that was about 18,000 words and plugging it into Claude and asking Claude to give me not a synopsis, but like back cover sales text. And it did a really good job. I would not have used it as is, but
So, are you saying that you, in a sense, copied the 18,000 word document, put it in like something like Chat GPT and said, write a synopsis or write a dust cover blurb, and it did?
yeah, it was Claude. So ChatGPT, and again, every time I say something like this, I'm sure somebody's going to say, you just didn't use it right. But my experience with ChatGPT is that it's more limited in the terms of the inputs you can provide. But Claude
Okay.
actually lets you attach a file. And I haven't tried it with a longer work than this 18,000 word novella. But yeah, I just attached the document that had the novella in it. I said, write, I'm trying to think how I worded it, a sales description for this thriller. And it was very good. It and it was useful in the sense that it called out 3 characters, the protagonist of the story and 2 of her sidekicks, but they were not the 2 sidekicks I would have guessed. And I realized when I read that the 2 sidekicks it had picked to mention in the blurb actually made more sense than the 2 sidekicks I would have picked if I had been writing it. And so things like that, I think any of those things where you put something to AI into AI, it comes out and you go, "Huh." It's
And so,
really
and how do
useful.
you spell Claude? Claude?
Yes.
Okay. Who knew?
Yeah. And on the this is going a little far afield from organization, but I am starting to recreate transcripts for the podcast using ChatGPT. Unfortunately, as far as I can tell, you can only put in 4,000 characters at a time. So because my transcripts are quite long, my transcripts are being automatically generated from Descript, which is the tool I use for the audio and video editing. And they're like pretty good, but not great. But I find that if I take chunks of 4,000 words at a time, put it into ChatGPT and say, correct typos and grammatical errors in this, it does a great job. And I'm sure that that 4,000 character limit is going to go away. But I found that ChatGPT was much better for those things that are like just correct stuff, and Claude was better for like the more imaginative stuff. Because if I tried to fix the transcript in Claude, it would like write an article or something. I couldn't come up with a prompt that would say like, "No, I just want you to fix the typos and the grammatical errors."
Right.
So again, another topic that everything is evolving so quickly that this is just a guideline. This is a point in time of how these things are behaving in
Right.
December of 2023.
Right. Right. It's evolving.
So we've talked a little bit about how we both organize fiction work. How else are you applying organization in your life as a writer that our listeners might benefit from?
I think that the approach that I take is pretty similar for nonfiction as well. I do some ghostwriting, and again, I keep the project separate. With ghostwriting, you're going to need contracts. You're going to need to be able to, you're dealing with a client who you want to make sure you're on the same page with them. And so there are no misunderstandings. So having a ghostwriting contract is important. I'm a manuscript editor, so I have a file or I have a folder for manuscript editing. And then each one of my clients has their own folder. And then within that folder, there are the different projects that they've hired me to do. If someone hires me to be a coach, I have a log file so that the relationship is documented. Usually people hire me for like they put me on a retainer for 5 hours of encouragement, I guess you could say. And so I just keep track of what I've been doing, how much time is left on the coaching clock, and they use the time strategically. So there are some clients who I've been working with for a couple of years and they haven't depleted the 5 hours yet. And someone will surface after a year and it's going, whoa, what's going on? And I have to go back into my file.
Yeah.
So being organized that way has really helped me stay up to date. And so maintaining that log is just something, as soon as the conversation is over or as soon as the project is over, I update it so that it's not something you want to put off, because if you put it off, there's so many other things that can get in the way. But you don't need to spend much time updating the log. Just get it out of the way, file it, and you can move on with your life. But it's invaluable when someone resurfaces and says, "Hey, let's pick up where we left off." And you're going, "Who are you again?"
Yeah. I think that that's great advice even for people who don't have clients. Any interaction, if you have an interaction with your, I don't know, book cover designer, editor, or something like that, to make that kind of note and to separate out the notes you're going to share with the person. What I do is whenever I have, it's especially handy on something like Zoom or any kind of virtual meeting, that when I start a meeting, I'll open a Word document and then I'll have it be like John DeDakis, and then I'll say like, "Oh, John and I met today and we chatted about such and such," um and then I can use that if I actually want to like send minutes. They're the things that I want to share with a person, and then there are the things that you might not want to share. Like if you find that a cover designer is always doing some kind of weird thing that's not what you're looking for, you could make it your private note that says, "Remember to remind him that I don't
Yeah.
want blood stains on my cover," or whatever. And then you'd have the public like, "This is what we agreed to do," kind of
Right.
document.
Exactly. Right.
You know, your comment about the contracts made me also think of another handy tool that I recently discovered. Is I had a contract that I needed to have signed, and I always struggle with the managing the whole e-signatures thing.
Right.
And I have a Dropbox account, as I think many people do. And I discovered that there's an app called Hello Sign, HELLOSIGN. And I think it probably used to be a separate app, but if you have a Dropbox account, at least a certain kind of Dropbox account, and you look in the left nav, there's a signatures option. And it's a very nice basic e-signature request and tracking. And you get some limited number. Like with my account, I get like 3 signatures a month, which is more than I need. But I like that Hello Sign on Dropbox.
Hmm. Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Wouldn't PDFs do the same? You can sign a PDF.
Well, I struggled with getting I don't think that I have the level of, like, Adobe or whatever that enables me to, like, make a signable field
Right.
in an online document. So the nice thing about HelloSign is that you upload the PDF, and then you list the signers, and then you drag a signature block over the PDF where you want each person to sign, and it's defined like, this is where Maddie's going to sign, this is where Don's going to sign. You can designate like the order in which you want people to sign. You enter a email address, and then you hit send, and HelloSign cycles it through the signers in the order, and then the person just has to, like, click into that sign on the PDF and type out their name or sign it with their mouse or whatever they wanna do. So, I always tried doing that with a PDF, and it was probably user error, but I could never get it to work for me.
Yeah, because I had to update my laptop, and on the old one, a PDF you could sign and everything was great. With the new laptop, it's like you gotta buy this, buy that, and it
Right.
gets a little discouraging.
Yeah, I was definitely out for the free option.
Yeah,
Yeah, I didn't wanna add yet another tool to my list of things that I would have to organize.
exactly.
You know, I was thinking another organizational tool that I use is I would recommend everybody keep an eye out for anything you have to access repetitively, and I'm a huge Excel fan. Um,
I hate
and
Excel.
yes. So, John, don't pay attention to this next little bit.
Okay.
But I have giant spreadsheets. Well, I have one super giant spreadsheet called William Kingsfield Publishers Pub Information. And over time, it's expanded to include even more things. But as an example, like for every book, you're going to have an ISBN. And you might have an ISBN you've purchased through Bowker, or you might have, I won't get into a description of the pros and cons, but if you're publishing on Drafted Digital, you might have a Drafted Digital assigned ISBN, and then you might have like a Barnes& and Noble assigned ISBN. There's the URLs that on all your sales platforms for each of your books, like anything like that that is repetitive, just go ahead and stick it in a spreadsheet because like if I want to post something online pointing people with links to my, let's say, my first book on my direct sales platform and on my books to read universal link, all I have to do is open up my pub info spreadsheet and filter on the book name, and there they are right there. I do the same thing with book descriptions. I do the same thing with testimonials. So don't force yourself to go look for the same information over and over again. Just bite the bullet and put it in a spreadsheet. And I really haven't found anything better than a spreadsheet. Like if you want to use sheets or whatever, that's fine. But yeah,
You do you.
yeah, I think that if people are willing to learn sorting and filtering, then the spreadsheet is the way to go. But so when you are looking for, like, let's say you have to provide a URL or an ISBN to somebody, how do you access that information? Do you have a non-spreadsheet alternative?
Yeah, I go searching. I have in my AOL files. I hadn't really thought about that, but there are some draft files so that when people are looking for ISB numbers and things like that, I've got a file where all of my books are listed with the ISBN numbers, and so I can go there. Usually, when I'm pitching a writing workshop, I have a file that has all the blurbs for the writing classes that I teach so that I can pluck from there and create a class that will combine a couple of the things. There's a file I have for bios because every writing workshop or writing conference, they want your bio, but they have different standards. Some want 50 characters, some want 100 words. And so I've got a bio file that has all kinds of different lengths of bios that I've written and adapt. And that's just one file. And I can go and go, oh, this is one, and just copy and paste it from there. But again, that's Word again.
Well, years ago in my corporate life, I facilitated a kind of like a new employee orientation, and one of the modules was about behavioral styles. And I think they were analyzing, supporting, controlling, and another one that's escaping me at the moment. But I really thought there were perfect analogies to Microsoft Office applications. Like there's just the Word personality, there's the Excel personality, there's the PowerPoint personality, and heaven help us, there's the Microsoft Access personality. So I think it's just an equivalent behavioral styles assessment.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It really, I think organization is a personal, these are personal choices that you
Oh yeah.
make. And it's an evolutionary thing. And I think I've learned a few things from you today, even on how to maybe adjust and adapt and evolve my own organizational style. It's definitely been trial and error as I've gone.
Yeah, for sure. For every person, I think that's the case. And so I thought it would be fun to close out with a question, and I think this is one we discussed earlier, but if not, it'll be a little surprise for you. So I have the question here: what is the relationship between organization and procrastination? Is that a question you had proposed?
I don't know if I proposed it or not, but I know I have procrastination nailed. I mean, I'm a master procrastinator. And but it's useful because what I tell my writing students is that unlike what Stephen King tells you, you got to write 1,000 words a day or you're not a serious writer. I don't buy that. I think if you're ruminating, you're writing, and you don't have to be moving your fingers on the keyboard in order to be a writer. Granted, there comes a time when you really do have to get your butt in the chair and the fingers on the laptop, but I think procrastination is incredibly useful because it's allowing your subconscious to process things. And so that when you do sit down, things have bubbled to the surface and it's more likely that it's going to flow onto the page. So it's not necessarily organization, but it is part of, I think, the creative process. And both procrastination and organization are serve the same end, and that's to be creative and get something down on paper, or eventually it'll be on paper, so that others you'll be able to connect with others with whatever your story is.
Yeah, that what you're saying reminds me of two things. One is that this is something I always have to remind myself of, but I have found a real value in procrastination in replying to emails. So normally, my goal is always the zero inbox, and my default mode is uh, reply to everything immediately because that's how you keep a zero inbox. But I realize, and this is a lesson that I learned and had to relearn and relearn and relearn in my corporate life, that if you just wait, and I don't mean days, I mean like 12 hours, 24 hours, a little bit of time, oftentimes either your answer is different because you've had more time to think about it, or the problem takes care of itself.
That you've really tapped into something that I think is worth talking about. This is my to-do list, and it's handwritten, it evolves, there are some crossouts on it, and some of the things that are on this list are based on emails that I have yet to answer. And some of them go back a month, which is, I'm so sorry, anybody who's still waiting for an email, it's coming, but and some of it is just they don't really need a quick response. Here's another thing that I'm doing that I've discovered. When I get an email from somebody and I look at it on my phone, my iPhone, I'm able to open it and then I'm able to mark it as unread. And so that'll at least give me a first glance at it so that I can ruminate about it, as you mentioned. But then when I file it, when I go to my laptop, it's still highlighted
Yeah.
as if it's brand new.
Yep.
And then so that reminds me, okay, I need to pay attention to this, but I've already been thinking about an answer. And I've discovered too that a lot of people are surprised when I answer right away. And so I think we are at a point with email where you don't have to answer instantly, especially if it's an important topic or a potential conflict or whatever, or someone is asking for a lot of information. You can have some time to kind of think about it so that when you compose your answer, it's already been percolating a little bit and the answer itself then becomes easier. And then again, I have anybody I've had communication with, I create a folder in my AOL file. Yes, it's AOL. Get over it. I have a folder in my AOL file of everyone that I'm in communication with, and I file their email and my response, and everything just goes into that file. So the inbox indeed gets cleaned out. Well, I've got 9,000 emails still in my inbox. A lot of it's junk,
Yeah.
but I'm the important ones are getting answered, and the relationship is maintained in its own folder, in its own email folder with that person, so that I'm able to keep track of the relationship. Do I go back and go through those? No, but they're there in case I need them.
Yeah, I think that another way to think about it, and I think this is a generational thing, because I think you and I grew up in the age of creating folders in AOL, for example. But something that a younger coworker pointed out to me when I was still in the corporate world is search, in many cases, is just as efficient, if not more efficient, than filing things in a folder. Because let's say you have an email that's related to me and Fred, then do you put that in the me folder? Do you put it in the Fred folder? Do you copy it and put it in both? But if you search for my name and Fred's name, or my email address and Fred's email address, then you can find it. And I have found that in fact, I don't think I put anything in a folder anymore in email, because I just find that a search is more likely to bring back what I'm looking for than looking through a folder of information. So again, just another perspective on it.
I would amend that by saying, yes, definitely to the search, because often the search has shown me things, has widened the net a bit to show me other things. I think that your suggestion, or your coworker's suggestion, is probably more relevant in a corporate environment where you're just getting this gush of emails. And so maintaining your own filing system can be a full-time job in and of itself.
Yeah.
But so that then means that a search will do it. But my concern would be a search might also cause things to fall through the cracks. Whereas if you do file it in that particular relationship folder, then you really know you have it. It's
Yeah.
not, you're not relying on the server in the sky to keep track for you.
Yeah. Yeah. All just things for people to tweak as appropriate for their own circumstances. And
Exactly.
the other thing that your earlier comment reminded me of, and then you gave me the perfect segue by talking about percolating on an email, is that idea of procrastination in the sense of pondering what you're working on in your fiction writing, for example, or your nonfiction writing too, I'm sure, is percolating being the third alternative to plotting and pantsing. And
Yes.
I credit that
Yes.
to Art Taylor, who had mentioned that he was a percolator. And I was like, yes, yes.
Yes.
I've never heard that term used in that circumstance, but I'm definitely a percolator.
Well, and it fits with the coffee fueled writer
That's
that all writers and journalists mainline coffee.
yeah,
So yes, I percolate is a perfect word, and it works for Art because he's very successful as a writer and quite talented. So that's a wonderful word to use. He's probably got it copyrighted now though. So
well, that's why he got on the podcast, because I was at a conference and he was speaking and he said percolator. And I wrote down Art Taylor, percolator, invite him to the podcast. We talked about other things too, but the percolator thing is what caught my attention because it sounded exactly right to my own experience. Well, John, this has been so much fun. Thank you for sharing your tips on organization. Thank you for being willing to debate some of the pros and cons of, oh, let's say Excel. So please let the listeners and viewers know where they can go to find out more about you and everything you do online.
well, and thank you, Maddie. I mean, it's always fun talking to you, and I think I learned a few things today too. People can get in touch. I'm John DeDakis. It's Greek. You can probably best get me through my website, which is my name, johndedakis.com. That's JOHN, D as in dog E, D as in dog A, KIS as in Sam.com.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maddie.